This is our first webinar this academic year, and the topic is Viable Plan Design 101, and I want to thank our panelists, Maria, Katie, and Brian, for joining us and helping me present today. We're going to start by introducing ourselves. My name is Fred Kingston. I work at College Success Foundation, and I'm joining you from Bellevue today. I've worked at College Success Foundation for about the last 2 years, and my role with Passport to College is me and my team, Molly Donahue and Donna Quach, are sort of resources, consultants, coaches to colleges who are implementing the Passport to College program on their campuses. And we are available to you to help answer questions and support the design of your viable plan and the implementation of your viable plan. And in addition, we do a lot of other work to support the Washington Passport Network in general. I'm going to hand it off to our panelists to give a quick introduction.
So hello everyone, my name's Maria Reyna and I'm the Associate Director of Retention Initiatives and External Partnerships here at Eastern Washington University. I'm also the designated support staff for all of our Passport scholars that are attending Eastern. We currently have 12 students here at Eastern utilizing the Passport funds. EWU is a four-year institution. We have about 12,600 students. 32% is our diversity population, and we're just located 15 miles outside of Spokane, Washington.
All right. Hi, my name is Katie Sully, and I'm the Assistant Director of our Workforce Services here at Lower Columbia College. I serve as the DSS for Passport here and also the Academic Advisor for our Passport students. Along with that, I'm also the academic advisor for all of our BFET students, and I do a lot of work on other workforce grants as well. LCC is a two-year institution located in Southwest Washington in Longview. And right now I have 3 Passport students.
Good afternoon, and I'm Brian Davidson. I am the Work-Year Training Coordinator and Passport to College Program Advisor at Whatcom Community College up here in Bellingham, Washington. The Passport to College Program Advisor here is pretty much the direct support staff, and I've been doing this work since, for 11 years, so about the inception of the program and throughout the entire duration of my time here at Whatcom Community College. And I've been fortunate enough to be a part of the leadership team over the last year and the start of this year with some of the redesign work and the expansion. Currently, the Passport program at Whatcom has about 6 students. And I provide all of the navigation, career and academic advising, and access to incentive grant funds and those sort of things.
All right, thanks for introducing yourselves. I'm going to start just by doing a little framing before we jump into our content. So these are our learning outcomes for today. We want to review some background information, including we want to talk about the submission deadline for viable plans. And we're going to talk just briefly about some recommendations regarding the process. So what should your process look like as you step through designing or updating your viable plan at your institution? Then we're going to spend most of our time reviewing practical examples of strategies that Brian, Maria, and Katie will share section by section. And we're going to ensure that we cover strategies that are relevant to both 2- and 4-year campuses. And at the end, we're going to cover some select FAQs. So Brian, Maria, and Katie each are going to pose a question that has been on their minds, and we're going to respond to those questions. If we have time permitting, then we will do a little live Q&A in the chat area. This is a 101 level training, meaning that we're going to cover basics, and we're going to use a lot of concrete examples to illustrate what we're trying to convey. There are some complex issues that are going to come up that we aren't going to really dive into today because of our time constraints. And I just want to acknowledge that, but I also want to say that As you have questions today, we encourage you to follow up with us here at CSF, and we are happy to respond to any questions that you have. We're also going to have a 102 session in December where we're going to go deeper into certain issues that we aren't going to be able to cover in depth today. If you have questions as we go today, we have a couple folks that are monitoring questions in the chat area. I don't know how many questions we'll be able to answer in real time given our time constraints, but if we can't address your question in real time, we still want you to type in your questions so that we can follow up with you after the webinar is over. This is our agenda. We're going to start, we've already reviewed our learning outcomes for the day. We're going to talk a little bit about background and then go section by section. And this is where we're going to spend most of our time. At the end, we're going to touch on budgeting and design best practices and then answer FAQs as I already explained. We do have a lot to cover in about an hour. We may run 5 or 10 minutes past 3 o'clock, although we will shoot to end at 3. And we thank all those who've joined us today and who can stay with us to the end. And we understand if you have to get off right at 3 o'clock. So what is the Viable Plan? It is a program implementation plan that describes your institutional priorities, the strategies that you use to support Passport scholars, and a plan for how you deploy resources to support Passport scholars. In the past, Viable Plans were always meant to be part of the way that institutions implement Passport, but starting July 1 this year, it's the first time that these plans are actually required to be submitted to the Student Achievement Council for review and approval. I know there's been a little bit of confusion about when these plans are due. And to be clear, they are due to WSAC on or before December 31st, 2018. If an institution signed up to participate after that deadline, then that institution would just work out with WSAC the timeline for when they would submit their plans. But for all 44 institutions who've already submitted a institutional agreement to participate, these plans are due at the end of the calendar year. And along with those plans, you also need to send in a budget, a planning budget, to Dawn. Lastly, plans should be revised on a yearly basis, and we hope that these will be living documents that institutions will update on a regular basis based on what they're learning about what's effective on their campus. At CSF, we've been working with colleges. We've already worked with about 15 colleges since the summer to start the Viable Plan process, the design process. And just a note, I would think about this process in these steps. We recommend that first colleges review their current program. So you may already have a good plan in place, and it's just important to look at what's already happening. Next, we recommend that staff update their plans, brainstorming strategies and goals, and really thinking about the new changes to Passport, including the changes to eligibility and the program expansion, and then think about how that may influence what you do on your campus. Next, we suggest that whoever's leading the drafting process asks for input. And this could just be from internal folks at your campus, but some institutions may also want to get outside input, and at CSF, we are happy to provide input. The value that we can add is, since we're working with a couple dozen colleges in this process, we may be able to offer suggestions based on other strategies that we're seeing in the planning process in other colleges that are similar. Step 4, approve and finalize. I don't want to be confusing. I'm not talking here about the WSAC approval process. I'm talking about just on your campus, a final step to bring folks together and look at the final draft and say, yep, we're done for this year. It's a final opportunity for folks to have discussion, and also an opportunity to kind of raise awareness on your campus that the Bible plan has been complete and that you're sending it in. And then you implement. And this is visualized as a cycle, because then again, at the end of the academic year, you start the process over again. So this is just a recommended way, kind of a framework to think about the process. And it could be that you think of this kind of formally or really informally, whatever works for you and your campus. And lastly, I again want to say that here at CSF, our statewide initiatives team can offer Bible plan design and implementation assistance at no cost. And we will come to you or meet with you remotely and really tailor our assistance to your needs. We basically just want you to know that if you need help in this process, that you have a resource, so that you feel like you've come up with a plan that's really solid, even if you have limited capacity. And you can request assistance through our website, WashingtonPassportNetwork.org, through the Contact Us area. And you should also know that all the program documents that we're going to talk about today, the program manual, all of the templates and everything like that, they're all on our website, WashingtonPassportNetwork.org, in the resources section under college. Okay, so to engage the audience real quick, I'm going to ask a couple poll questions before we get started. Here we go. So audience members, please look at your questions and go ahead and respond to this first question. Where are you in the Bible planning process? We'd like to see where you're at. It'll help us as we present today. Okay, I'm going to leave this open for about 10 more seconds. So if you haven't responded and you'd like to, go ahead and respond. Okay. So you all should be able to see these results. This is just good context for us as we get started talking about our recommendations for you. It looks like only about 10% of you are done or almost done, so the rest of you are still in process, and that's really helpful for us to know. I'm going to ask one more polling question here. But I need to change the question. Let's see. Okay, so the next question is about your cohort sizes. Go ahead and tell us historically about how many Passport students have you had on your campus annually. And this is also going to help us as we give you recommendations today. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share the results to that one. So it looks like the vast majority of folks have historically had under 5 students. That's good to know as we offer suggestions today. And some of you have larger cohort sizes. And there's a couple who have no baseline data. Okay, so panelists, that's just good for us to know as we offer suggestions to everyone today. So let's start talking about the viable plan and our suggestions. The viable plan has 6 main sections where we talk about what strategies we're going to use to support students, and it starts with recruitment. So this is the area where you talk about your institution strategies for conducting outreach to students from foster care and their adult supporters. So I'm going to hand it over to our panelists now to kind of talk about examples of strategies that they're going to put in this area.
Yeah, perfect. So this is Maria again out at Eastern, and we're fortunate enough to have a dedicated recruiter out of the Office of Admissions who was hired to recruit students, undocumented students and our foster youth students. And so Emmanuel Lopez is his name, and I'm able to work with him and really look at where are our students traditionally coming from, which is definitely from the Spokane area, and which programs they're coming from. So really looking at either attending events that they are hosting or having them attend events that we are hosting here at Eastern. He's able to look at the admissions applications of students who select that they are from a foster youth background and start to outreach to them. And that was really huge this past year to have him be able to get that information from day one and then outreach to them and then be able to make connections with them prior to them even confirming and attending Eastern in the fall.
Thanks, Maria.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So coming from a smaller school, we don't have anyone specifically for outreach to foster youth. So one of the things that we're going to be putting in our plan, and I've been working on a lot, is building really strong connections with our K-12 foster care district liaisons. So one of the ways that I've been doing this is being able to partner with our outreach staff here and go out to those schools and kind of just try to make the connections in person. Because of our more rural area, we have foster care liaisons that are doing a lot more than just serving as the foster care liaison. They're counselors or serving in other capacities within their schools. So really just trying to have a presence on these campuses to try to catch students in, their 10th, 11th, and 12th grade years, so we can really help transition them to our school rather than just finding them once they're already here.
Thanks, Katie.
So Whatcom is also a smaller school, and we do not have dedicated recruiters at all for foster youth. I think the thing that I can add that has been the most useful in the past has been a close partnership with YouthNet, the independent living provider up here in the Northwest. On occasion, I've gone and met with them for some of their events at the Emerson School or in other larger like graduation type events that they've been involved in. We've also had YouthNet students on campus. We've hosted them for customized campus visits, including getting instructors from specific programs or students from specific programs, sort of customized for the individuals that were coming and participating that day. We've also had YouthNet students join us for our new student orientation in the fall, what we call the Whatcom Wave. And in a lot of in the past, what it's looked like has been a very similar to just like a conference sort of thing where there's breakout sessions and they've been able to join us as well as the YouthNet staff in terms of like what it's looked like to experience college at Whatcom. As we just recently got an Open Doors, a youth re-engagement program here on campus, and we'll be looking to open doors to see where we can also do some recruitment and maybe leverage some resources together.
Thanks, Brian. So something that stands out to me is that there's obviously really different contexts that you're representing today, and you have different student populations and resources. But a common theme is definitely reaching out to school districts and off-campus partners who have a lot of expertise working with youth from foster care. So I think that's a theme that's going to kind of weave throughout our presentation today, is using off-campus resources to help make strong connections with students before they hit your campus and then once they're there. Okay, the retention and graduation section of the Viable Plan is probably the section where you have the most strategies listed. It is really talking about how you support your students once they are on campus, from engaging them and letting them know what services and supports are available to them through their whole journey until they complete. So panelists, I'll hand it back over to you. What strategies are you going to focus on in this section of your plan?
Right. So we definitely have come up with a framework around the 5 research-based milestones that we're using at Eastern for our population. And those milestones are listed there, but it's the early career exploration, filling out the FAFSA-WASFA, extracurricular activities, meeting with faculty on a regular basis, and your academic advisor. And so looking at these, we really have been able to identify what are the key ones we want to do right away, which was our FAFSA-WASFA at the beginning of October, and making sure that our students are connecting with us to get that completed, but also with our financial aid office. So it's one that we know that students tend to need a lot of help with in terms of what is it that most of them are renewing the FAFSA-WASFA, and so definitely working with them on that. The milestones are really is that foundation, and looking at the academic year, we're really identifying what should be happening fall, winter, and spring. Since we're on the quarter system, what we need to identify for those students, and then just helping them along the way, because we want to do educational events, but we also bring them in for social events. So that might look like as an individual one-on-one meeting, or that might be in a group setting, depending on what the topic is.
Great, thanks, Maria.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I mentioned earlier, at LCC, we have an average of probably around 3 to 5 passport students. Like I said, right now we have 3, which is really great for some of the retention and graduation pieces that we embed into our plan, or we're planning to embed. I meet with students a lot, one-on-one, just going over, whatever barriers they're facing, really just connecting them to resources on campus, doing a lot of that work, just kind of meeting with me specifically. But another challenge with having such a small cohort is it is harder to connect them to each other a lot of times. So really focusing on leveraging partnerships with our other programs within our college, such as all of our workforce programs, been able to get passport students really involved in like our BPET program, for example, where they have just an extra layer of support and a sense of community just to be involved. Our TRIO program is another one for students that are planning to transfer, and other programs like disability support services. And I think what I really just want to add on this one is I'm doing a lot of work with students, walking them over to these programs, having, sitting in on meetings and doing these types of things. So not just telling the students about these different programs they can be involved in, but really trying to get them involved and be part of the process for them, so they can really be engaged and have more than just one person to turn to here on campus.
Great.
At Whatcom Community College, it's very similar. I provide all the career and academic advising, the coaching, the support, and the resource navigation. Ultimately, I work with the students to try to improve their career and academic clarity, and that can be very different for every student that comes in, as well as helping them find access to resources, which differs for all of them as well. I have I think a pretty good bridging system, bridges them from getting that first quarter, that helps us to identify some of those things. Either maybe their needs immediately as they're coming into school, or maybe things that may come up later than they're sort of aware of. Similar to what Katie is doing, and walking them over to places, sitting out on meetings. And if there's a specific need that a student has in terms of engagement and being able to help feel connected on campus, whether it's meeting with a club or going to intercultural center or something like that, that may be a time where I may be the person that's just hanging out with them and doing that as well. But it is very customized and individualized for the students as well.
Great. So the reflection I'll share here is working with a lot of different schools. The programming really does depend, the design depends on the number of students on campus, as you've heard. And there's really great strategies for working with smaller numbers of students and larger numbers of students. But I think the strategies tend to look a little different on two-year campuses and four-year university campuses. For example, we do see more events bringing students together on the four-year campuses, and I think that's it for a number of factors, whereas we see a much more individualized approach where there are smaller numbers. The last thing I would say here is Brian, Maria, and Katie have shared a little slice of what they know, they will put in their plans, but I know they have a lot of good thinking about specific strategies in this section. And so I just in general would encourage attendees to think about following up with these panelists and others, other DSSs that to ask them about what strategies they're going to use, because that peer-to-peer kind of consultation is a really great way to get good ideas for your institution.
Right.
Okay, we touched on this with recruitment, but let's talk now more about specific strategies for connecting with regional partners, meaning specifically off-campus external partners.
Yeah. So about a year ago, we recognized the importance of meeting with our partners, especially when we're working and trying to serve the same student. And so we found that we weren't communicating with one another in terms of serving our students, and therefore I think students tend to then not know who should they go to in times of need. And so here we established a regional coordination amongst the groups of the community colleges four-year and our community partners in the Spokane area. And so we've been meeting now for over a year. And this year we decided to really focus on our youth and the transition that they're going to go through from high school to post-secondary education. And so as a regional group, that is something that we will work on, and we meet quarterly, which has been great because we get to come together and talk about what are the strategies and what is going to work best for each different community organization, and then the transition and what does that look like if they're going to come to Eastern or Wazoo or any of the community colleges.
So like I talked about earlier, in our partnerships with K-12 and trying to strengthen that, that's really where I wanted to focus on this slide with our connections with our regional partners. I'm just going to share a specific example that I thought might be helpful for people after talking this through with the other panelists. The way that I approached the connections with the regional partners was a little bit different than maybe like Maria will in a bigger city with more people to connect with that have the time and the capacity. So really what I did was send out an email to all of the foster care liaisons in our service district here, to all the school districts, and just ask them, like, what would be the most helpful for you? Do you know, a meeting with me specifically, or emails, just kind of posing those questions. And I ended up meeting with one of our counselors out in a rural school, probably, it's about 30 minutes even from our college, really small. The elementary, middle, and high school are all in one building. So I went out there, remember, she's their counselor and their foster care liaison, and we had a great conversation. And it was just really meaningful for me to go out there. She was really appreciative and really made a connection with her. She even had students to send to me right away. So that's just one example of kind of the way that we approached it as a smaller school. And doing it this way has been, so far this year, really successful for me.
Up in the deeper areas of the northwest part of Washington State, we have Skagit Valley College, Bellingham Technical College, Whatcom Community College, Western Washington University, and Northwest Indian College, all hanging out really close to one another. That means that our regional partners are going to be looking towards all those schools for potential places where their students and clients might be wanting to go. So what our hope is that in the areas of the viable plan where there's an opportunity for all these schools, right now it's specifically Skagit, BTC, and Whatcom, where there's an opportunity for us to make some common approaches. So our independent living providers or our K-12 folks will know that if they try to bring or refer students to us, that there's going to be a common experience. They know that there's going to be a direct support person. They know that financial aid is going to get taken care of, and these sort of things. They're going to get some advising. So we're looking at trying to pull things together in a way that we're actually providing access to education, higher education in this region, and not necessarily just access to, say, like Whatcom Community College. If I was independently going to go out and meet with our regional partners about how to access Whatcom Community College, I could talk at length at the types of services that I can provide and the types of programs that we offer. But if we could take a broader approach and say, in this region, this is what we have to offer, and this is the common experience that both the staff and the potential students will experience, then maybe we'll make that a little bit easier for us to sort of work together. So that's the hope that we're working with right now. Currently, we're writing our plans independently, and then going to come back together to see where those common areas might be, and we can actually write that directly into the plans and maybe even name other schools a little bit here and there.
Yeah, you guys, from my perspective, this is such an area of opportunity, and it's really cool to hear, what the panelists are sharing is, thinking both about coordinated approaches and also just really individualized relationship-based approaches. And, the two things are not mutually exclusive. We need multiple strategies, and we need strategies that are going to work for our communities and our institutions. So these are some great ideas. And just the idea, like Brian, I think the idea of being really student focused here and thinking about students kind of looking at their options and getting information in a way that is efficient and organized in a way that makes sense to them and where there's some fidelity. It's, probably a vision that will make incremental progress towards over time, but what a cool outcome that would be.
Well, and Fred, I'd like to add that, ultimately what I'd like to eventually see is that if I'm meeting with a student or a staff from K-12 or something, and we're talking about a specific goal of a specific person, that what we're able to do is say, hey, maybe Whatcom is not the right fit because maybe another school would be, that we can have that conversation early on so they can get in the right spot and make sure that we can help with retention because they have the right fit for the school that they're going into. And I think that that's a method that we've done in some of our workforce programs out here, and I think it's been really great, and it's helped to improve our relationships between colleges and also with partners too. So I really hope that that's what that'll end up looking like.
Nice. Okay, so funding is the next section, and I just want to say here that institutions' financial aid teams use their discretion to ensure that passport funds, both financial aid dollars for students and incentive grant funds, are used effectively while maintaining compliance with laws, regulations, guidance, and also just adhering to internal practices. And so this winds up being an area where there's a bit of complexity. There's not really a kind of cookie cutter set of recommended approaches here. And this definitely is an area that we'll dive in deeper in December during the 102 session when we have some financial aid administrators to help us present as well. But we're not going to just skip over this section. We are going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that the designated support staff here are confident in kind of describing. So take it away, you guys.
All right. So yeah, so I'm going to just actually talk about how I directly work with students in regards to their financial aid package. So every Passport student that I have, you know, if we're meeting one-on-one right before the quarter starts, hopefully we're really pulling up their financial aid award and looking at it and just making sure that, you know, everything's correct, that they have their passport, that they, you know, if they're eligible for other grants, you know, if they, making sure they have state need grant, making sure that they have college bound, those types of things, just kind of making sure everything looks right. And if it doesn't look right, I'm going over to financial aid and trying to troubleshoot with them. But on top of that, really, we focus on a lot of areas around budgeting. A lot of students, you know, this is the first time that they're attending college, that they're going to be getting this big sum of money at the beginning of the quarter. And really just going over some really seemingly basic things like, how is this going to stretch out through a quarter? What are costs going to look like for things like books or supplies, and just some of those really basic financial literacy things, but working with them one-on-one rather than, you know, just giving them a worksheet or something, just really sitting down with them and looking at their award and looking at how the money can be used and answering any questions they have in that way.
So yeah, so at Eastern, like I had mentioned earlier, we're really fortunate to have dedicated staff, and Rosie Murray in our financial aid office has been my go-to person for the past 17 years when it comes to our CSF scholars. And so Passport, she's the one that distributes the Passport funding to our youth, and she's able to let me know which students are still needing information, whether it be that they were selected for verification, or that they're missing documentation, or they just haven't accepted their award letter. So prior to every incoming new freshman must attend one of our first step dates throughout the summer. And so prior to each first step date, we look at our students and we see who's attending which first step date. And then she's able to send me specifically, these students are fine, or these students need this information. And so then that's something that we can relay to the students before they come. If we don't reach out to them before they come, then at least we know we're seeing them on those first step dates to get that information to them. And so that's for our freshman population, and that's something new that we did this summer, and it worked out really well because we weren't waiting until they actually attended in the fall to really make sure that their financial aid packages were complete. And for the returning students, we definitely make sure that they have their award letters before the end of the academic year. As returning students, they will receive their awards May, maybe June. And so making sure that they have their award packages, and then that everything is complete for that next academic year.
At Whatcom Community College, I think the thing I want to talk about most is the ability to just walk right into the business office and with the financial aid director. So anytime I'm meeting with a student and something comes up with financial aid, I can almost always just walk right into the financial aid director's office. His name's Dave Klafke. He's always there to help me fix problems and make sure that we can remove any barriers that money can help remove. So he's always great with that. We work together to make sure that the financial aid packages are clean. But with the incentive grant dollars, the way I access those is I work directly with people in the business office. There's a lot of, it can be difficult to figure out how to get a chunk of money to pay off a creditor so people can go back to school, or to get that into to pay for, you know, housing or transitional housing or something like that. And so being able to just walk right in there and say, hey, listen, this is the need I have. It's happening right now. What's the fastest way I can get the money over there? And they've been really great with helping me do that. It took a little bit to be able to explain how the incentive grant dollars could be used. And once we got past that, it became really easy to just sort of just work rapidly together to eliminate those barriers. I find that the parts of my job here that take up the most time is usually when we have some sort of barrier that is going to need some sort of financial assistance to remove. And I can spend a good chunk of a day or a few days just trying to pull those things together. But I think it's probably one of the most important bits of work that I get to do. So I'm really, really grateful for that type of access that I have to our business office and to financial aid, so thereby the students also get that access.
Yeah, so Brian, you're touching on the incentive grant, and one thing for folks to know is that there's a really good guide that has been produced with the Student Achievement Council and with a lot of input from designated support staff on different campuses. And it's on our website in the resources college area. So if you're attending the webinar today and you haven't read through that yet, I would recommend just taking a look at that. It really breaks down, I think, what Brian was talking about in terms of just understanding kind of the intent of that money, and lots of concrete examples of how the Student Achievement Council would be supportive of that money being used, is all documented in that guide. This is an area, like I said, we're going to dive deeper on in December, because a lot of questions come up in this area. But the final thing I would say before we move on is just when I go to different campuses and my colleagues go to different campuses and we talk about this, the thing that really comes up is what I think everyone mentioned is, you know, Maria mentioned Rosie and Katie mentioned this in terms of the advocacy that she does, and Brian did too. Just having great relationships with folks in the financial aid office, and folks in the business or the grants office or wherever the incentive grant money is tracked, is a really big piece of this, so that because it isn't always straightforward, it often does require working on short timelines to eliminate barriers for students. And so people do that in all different ways, but it's really worth describing in this section of your plan. How do you do that? How do you all work together? And it really does look different in different places. Okay, so let's touch quickly on this section, expectations of students. This is a section where you may have a lot to write, or you may not, as you'll hear from our panelists now.
Okay, I'll start. Brian and I kind of talked about this earlier, so I'll give a perspective from LCC, but it sounds like we're doing a lot of the same things when it comes to expectations of students. I work really closely with some of our workforce grants that require extensive reporting on student participation and those types of things. And I know a lot of us around the state are really used to those types of reporting and participation requirements. That is not how I approach the participation for Passport students. I definitely highly encourage them to check in with me regularly, make appointments, especially around like priority registration time and you know, filling out their FAFSA, those types of things. If any types of barriers come up, I tell them they can always come and talk with me. I do notice a trend of, you know, a lot of meetings right before the quarter starts, as the quarter starts, and kind of die down as they get into the swing of things. But I'm definitely not requiring students to meet with me, like, you know, for example, you must meet with me every other week or anything to that extent by any means.
Yes, at Whatcom, there's no specific requirements for Passport students, you know, specifically to uphold to be part of the program. Usually what I try to do is I just try to lay out the roles a little bit, and I like to say that their job is to go to school, get good grades, and ask a lot of questions. And my job is to answer as many questions as I possibly can and maybe provide some additional information that they may not have thought of. I do reach into them in the middle of the quarter a couple different times around different sort of deadlines and process times before registration, and so they know to kind of check in with me, mostly about money and classes, and also about just academic success in that given quarter. And so that gives them an opportunity to come and meet with me. And I do sort of mention that meeting with me regularly, or at least quarterly, will help them, and to make sure that they come and talk to me before there's a problem, because then I have a lot more latitude to be able to help them with it. And that's pretty much it.
So for the 4 freshmen that we have this year, they have the same academic advisor, and as a freshman, they must meet with their academic advisor at least once per quarter. We encourage our passport recipients to meet with their advisor at least twice, to definitely begin that relationship with the academic advisor and then the students. I was also able to hire a student to be the peer mentor for the 4 freshmen. So the student's role is to meet with the students on a weekly basis. They do one-on-one meetings, and then they do group meetings. And so that's been going really well. And part of that is the peer that I hired, she was able to go through training through our College Reading and Learning Association. So she's receiving a CRLA certification to be a peer mentor. And so that really helped give her the foundation of what is a peer mentor, and to have the language to start working with our new students. And then she meets with me on a weekly basis to let me know how things are going. And that's where I know that, this student needed, support with books, or, financial aid still isn't going well, or things like that. And so we do, so those milestones that I talked about earlier, we're looking at those milestones, and then that peer is really definitely helping with that, and then along with the academic advisor.
Great. Yeah, so this is another one of those areas for me where, there's no one-size-fits-all recommendation, but I do think it's valuable for all institutions to think about how you set expectations for students, no matter what they are. I think that's valuable, and it'll be valuable to just document your process in the plan. Okay. The last section is the other section, which actually turns out to be a really important section. It's not a throwaway. It's the area where you can get really creative. So, with incentive grant funds, institutions can pay for capacity building, staff development, awareness raising activities, and other things that make sense for your campus that may not cleanly fit into another section of the viable plan. So I'm just going to ask Maria to share a really recent example of an event that falls into this category.
Yeah, so Eastern's really fortunate to have George Duvall, who's our coordinator in the Africana Education Department. He's our coordinator that works with students. And when I met him 2 years ago when he started at Eastern, he talked to me about his background as being a part of the foster care system for 13 years, and that he had written a book about his experience, and he's a motivational speaker. And I'm like, you're right here on campus. You have to speak to my students. And so yesterday we had him talking to Eastern as a community. We also invited our community partners in Spokane. So for example, Meade School District brought, I think, about 9 students, and then Independent Living was able to bring a few other students as well, and Treehouse, I believe, brought a few students too. So it was really cool to really just kind of talk about it with George in terms of, just being a present on campus for these students, that the students can go to him as an ally for our foster youth, and then being able to share that with the community of Eastern and Spokane, being a part of that community, and then having someone that the staff and faculty can go to and talk to about, foster care. And so it went, I think, really well. Of course, I'm biased, but I think those that were in attendance were really thankful of George of sharing his personal story. We were able to purchase books using, and so George, there was a fee, so we used incentive grant funds to pay for the fee, and along with purchasing the books for all of the foster, for my passport students in the program. So then they were able to get a book from George, so yeah.
Thanks for sharing that example, Maria. Again, I would just emphasize here that, you know, this program is so cool because of how flexible it is. Mm-hmm. So I've heard a lot of ideas from different campuses about different ways they want to raise awareness on their campus about foster care issues, and sometimes that's about raising it in the community or raising it with students, but sometimes that's about raising it with faculty and staff. Mm-hmm. So you can think about that in a lot of different ways. And again, I think if you have a good idea and it doesn't fit in another section, this is where you want to put it so it's written down. Okay, I want to talk really quickly about the budgeting that's required. So I mentioned that when you submit your plan that a budget has to be included, and there's some questions that come up about this I'll address right now. First of all, the budget is a planning budget and can change. So we expect, I mean, WSAC expects that you'll submit a planning budget and at the end of the year, you'll report back on how money was spent, and there will be variances, and that is totally okay. There just might be some explanation, like with any budgeting and reconciling process, about why the variances, what they were and why. But this is a just normal planning, kind of routine planning task, aligning resources to strategies. There is a template that's on our website that institutions can use if it suits you. We wanted to make sure there was an option where there's a tool at your disposal if you needed one. And if you have a different budgeting tool that you're using anyway, we are not asking that you recreate the wheel. Just use the template that makes sense for you and your accounting team and your department and your institution, and then you can share that with the narrative of your written plan when you submit it to WSAC before the end of the calendar year. As a matter of process, I think, you know, this is a really important part of the process because you can think about the strategies you want to use, but then like Maria said, like just as an example with the event she just described, there are real costs associated with that. And that's often true. So what are things going to cost, and do you have the money to pay for those things, and at what scale? That's a really important part of the planning process overall. And so, you know, I would say based on my many conversations with the Student Achievement Council and other colleges, this is not so much about compliance as it is about kind of really wanting to understand plans in detail. Finally, just a trend I would notice, institutions that have more students on campus, what I see is a lot more of the money in a budget gets spent on services and supports. And there are a good amount of campuses that don't have a ton of students, but have a good amount of incentive dollars that they already have acquired. And those campuses are really thinking about, okay, we don't have a ton of students. How do we build capacity? How do we do more effective outreach? And so I think that kind of trend in each case makes a lot of sense. So we're getting ready to close here, and I just want to give you some of my recommended practices as you're doing this process for your institution. First of all, when you're writing your viable plan, at some point, I hope you start to think about what your goals are at your institution. And I hope you use your plan, or you consider using your plan as an opportunity to set goals. For example, what is the goal for retention for passport students at your school? Can you quantify that? I think it's really important to write these goals down so that at the end of the year, you can look back at, what your goal was and if you met it or not. And it's okay if you don't meet your goals, but it's really important to know so that you can adjust and course correct. It also allows you to really think about prioritizing high impact strategies. So I've gone through this with a couple of colleges where we list a ton of strategies, especially in that in that retention and graduation area. There's so many things you could do, and it becomes a really long list. So, but the question is, what is really going to be the highest impact for students, especially given that, a lot of folks are working with serious capacity constraints. So if you had 15 strategies, being realistic, if you had to focus down, what are the 5 strategies you think will make the biggest difference to get you to your goal? That's where I think setting the goals become really helpful. Second, Katie mentioned this and Brian mentioned this a lot, and I know Maria has thought about this too. Think about things that are already working really well on your campus, and how can you just give Passport students access to those services and supports. We absolutely do not want to duplicate efforts that are already really successful. So maybe you can just wrap students into programs that would be a good fit for them, and maybe with some tweaks so those students, it's a fit and it meets their needs. And then finally, this is broad, but we've talked about this a lot today. The more that you can create new internal and external partnerships and strengthen the ones that exist and leverage them, the more successful we're all going to be. And I think the internal partnerships, like between a DSS, the financial aid administrator, and a leadership team member, and the whole constellation of people that work together to support these students, I think that piece is just as important as reaching out into the community. And I'm really inspired by some of the work I see going on at campuses right now for folks getting organized to kind of like take it to the next level. It's really cool. Okay, so we wanted to cover some questions, but we knew that we'd have some time constraints. And so what we decided to do was each panelist has prepared a question they want to ask, and I'm going to try my best to give a good answer. So let's go ahead and do this part, you guys.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the success indicators, and so my question is, are the goals and the indicators required in the viable plan?
No. You do not have to write down success metrics. It is not required. It is only a recommendation. But I think it's a recommendation that's really grounded in some good conversations that are happening with different colleges and institutions around the state. And I think just in general, people are starting to think, wow, to have a good plan, you kind of need to really carefully describe what you think success will look like. So no, you don't have to write them, but it's recommended. And it doesn't have to, and I would just think of how you write the goals. There's not one way necessarily that has to look. It doesn't have to look like really like numbers. It could be, you could describe in different ways what your goals are, but it's suggested that is a point of discussion in this process.
Perfect, thanks.
All right, so my question is around what happens if a college is encountering challenges either starting or writing their plan?
Yeah, so my answer is I hope you will reach out for support, and we're standing by at CSF to provide the support that we can offer. And I would also say that, man, there are so many smart, dedicated experts working on college campuses that are doing this all at the same time. And so reaching out to peers in your area is also a really good approach. I also would say that Dawn Cipriano McCafferty at the Student Achievement Council, who's information is in this PowerPoint, and we'll share this PowerPoint, is another really responsive, really supportive person who can answer questions from the Student Achievement Council's direct point of view. So if you encounter challenges in meeting the Viable Plan deadline, we hope that you will reach out for support so that you get what you need so you can have a really good plan for the year. And I would just add too, if you then encounter challenges with implementation, say you set goals in your plan, but you don't meet those goals, I would not be worried about punitive measures being taken as a result of not meeting goals. On the contrary, you know, we as a community of practice, and I know this is true for the Student Achievement Council, we want to know what works and what doesn't work. So we're building evidence for what really works to support our students, and there's a lot of value in setting goals even if you don't meet them. And then the answer is just to course correct and update your plan for the next year. Does that answer your question, Katie?
Yes, thank you.
So my question has to do with incentive dollars. We know that there are some schools out there that have an excess of incentive dollars right now anyway. Also know that we may set up a budget where we imagine we're going to have, you know, 5 or 6 students and they'll be bringing in the regular incentive dollars each quarter. But, you know, with the expanse of eligibility, we may end up with more than we imagine. We also understand that there's a kind of an expectation that those dollars would be spent at the end of the year. So my question is, you know, how do we respond to surplus? How do we respond to WSAC? How do we put that in the plan? And where are the opportunities for us to maybe even reserve some of those dollars so we can build something bigger?
Great. This is a question that's coming up at many campuses, and you know, the program's been around for 10 years, and for the schools that have been participating for most of that time, it's very common to have an accumulated amount of incentive dollars on a campus. So I was just talking with Dawn Cipriano McCafferty last week about how to answer this question. And so this is the message. You know, the Student Achievement Council wants colleges to think carefully about using this money for the benefit of students. In the coming 2-year cycle, there is some language in the agreement that the colleges have signed that says, as a matter of due diligence, colleges are going to attempt to spend out the money that they receive within the programmatic cycle on students, so that we avoid in the future big accumulations of incentive grant dollars. So first, I would say that's a goal. If money is accrued within that cycle anyway, then what will happen is the institution will just need to, as a part of their annual reporting, sort of provide some explanation about what their plan is to use the money to the benefit of students moving forward. When it comes to reserves that are already accumulated, you know, the answer is kind of like, schools need to have a really, we would love to sort of, for schools to explain in writing their plan to the Student Achievement Council for how to use that money to greatest impact. But there is not a one-size-fits-all requirement about how fast an institution must spend that money, or on necessarily how they do it, or on when it needs to be spent. So I imagine that if a school wrote in a plan that over the course of several years they had a plan to thoughtfully spend that money down, that would be acceptable. Does that answer your question, Brian?
I think so. It sounds like plan for all the money, make it a good plan, and you know, kind of track and see what happens.
Right, and there's not going to be punitive measures if the money doesn't get spent, but the responsibility of the institution is really to rigorously think about, you know, that money is really supposed to be for students, and so, you know, it's really different in every context, you know, so So what's your best thinking about how that money should be used? And then just have that, communicate that plan and document that plan. So it's partially about letting WSAC know how you're going to use the money, but it's partially like we know that there's a lot of turnover on our campuses. And so if you don't put that plan in writing, then a year or 2 years from now, then that the memory of what that plan was supposed to be may get lost. And so that's also what we're trying to sort of solve for. All right. So we're a little bit over time, so we're not going to have time for live Q&A today. But I will just say in closing that if this webinar sparked more questions, we really would love for you to reach out to our team, and we'll answer the questions that we can answer right away. And if it's something we can't answer right away, then we'll just do our best to connect you with the folks who can get you answers. And we also are standing by to help with viable plan design support between now and the end of the calendar year if you haven't already scheduled that with us. We are going to have at least one webinar every month through the rest of this academic year. And our next webinar is going to be on November 14th. And we have a team of community educators from Coordinated Care who are going to present on the kind of more clinical issue of how do you help students from care cope with holiday stress, especially in the higher ed context. So I think it's a timely issue that probably a lot of us are thinking about. Finally, my ask for all the attendees today is, this is our first webinar of the season. We really want to make sure these are useful for you. We're going to send you all a survey at the end here, and I would really like to see 100% response rate so that we hear from everyone on if this was useful and how we can make these better going forward. Panelists, do y'all have anything else to add before we say goodbye?
No.
I would just say look on the Washington Passport Network website. There's a blog that Fred did interview Rosie and I, and then my Bible plan is on there as well as a draft. We're still working on it, but as an example to look at. So I would just say that, to look on the website for those items.
That's great. And we're going to keep posting other examples of plans on that blog series. So yeah, please do check out the website. And let us know if there's something you want to see on the website that you don't see on there. Please let us know and we'll work on it. Well, thanks everyone for attending. I really hope this was helpful. And we hope that you'll join us again next month for our next webinar. And thanks so much for Katie and Maria and Brian. Y'all are the experts. I really, really appreciate your help with presenting today.
Thank you for asking.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.